Welcome to a flash episode of the Dark Zone, an adventure racing podcast. We have Emily Korsch of Carter Racing, Jason Magness of Bend Racing, and Brent Freedland of Rootstock Racing. For those of you who are new to the Dark Zone, this is a special kind of episode. There's no intro, there's no music, there's nothing. There's a race going on right now down in Arkansas called Expedition Ozark. It is an ARWS demonstration race that is going on this year, and I have assembled a crack team of experts to talk about the race. Now, all I will say to our panel, is that we're very good at this. We like to talk about racing granularly. Newer racers listen to the Dark Zone, so always pepper your comments thinking of the person who doesn't know a whole lot about the sport. We don't want to get too much in the weeds, but we're glad you're here. Emily is the newest member of the commenting team. So Emily, I'm going to let the other fellows go first so you can get a sense of this commentary. I always go to Brent first. It's tradition. Brent, hot take on the race so far. How's it going? Fire away.
I don't know. I think Emily's a lot smarter than me, and she should go first.
Okay. Emily, very good. Emily, you're smarter than Brent. Hot take. How's the race going so far?
Okay. Trial by fire. First off, I need to do a shout out to the race organizers, Danny and Jason. This is a big lift or whatever corporate speak you want to use, but it's a big task to organize a race like this. And to my knowledge, it's their first effort of this magnitude. And I feel like things are going pretty well from a spectator's point of view. So I just shout out to them. I feel like the lead teams are just smashing. They're going so fast. It's fun to watch, and it's fun to watch a lot of my friends who are in the middle of the pack, and many of them experiencing their first multi-day effort. And I hope they're loving it.
For larger context, thanks, and for bringing that up. This is the first race for Expedition Ozark. Jason Bettis and Danny Collins are putting this race on. In terms of the universe right now, they just passed the 60-hour mark of the race. So from a time check perspective, time-wise, halfway through the race, and it's going spectacularly. It's a strong race. There's been some ups and downs with maps and questions, but every single race director goes through that. We've experienced race directors on the panel tonight. They certainly live that feeling of why is everyone going that way? They should be going that way, and things like that. But I do agree with you that for a first effort on behalf of Ozark, it's going really well. A lot of great media coming out of it. Jeff O'Connor's involved in that, helping to put a lot of that together. There's a lot of good people on the ground down in Arkansas. So I'm spot on. You mentioned the front of the race and you mentioned the mid-packers. Let's go front of the race right now. Jason, could you talk a bit about where the race is at this point, about halfway through? Who's at the pointy end?
At the pointy end, but first things first, you mentioned something at the very beginning. So I just want all your new listeners or the new adventure racers, if you're here for the music, the Dark Zone is not the podcast for you. So at the very beginning, you said you're not going to do the music. It's okay, but we can send you to better music podcasts. Okay, so the Dark Zone is not that. This is for extreme endurance adventure racing, right?
Well, you have to tolerate the music also. And before you start, Jason, I do want to give you a shout out, listeners out there. Go to Spotify, go find the Bend Racing podcast. Bend Racing, which is Jason's organization, has jumped into podcasting with both feet. Find them on Spotify. A fantastic listen. Jason, 20 end of the race, no music allowed. Go for it.
Right, no music allowed. I'm personally heavily invested because, 3 or 4 days ago, I was supposed to be on that team. And then I found out I had a kidney stone. Basically, the morning we woke up to go to the plane, a really big kidney stone. So that didn't fly. We got a replacement within 24 hours of the start of the race. And obviously that's working out well. Dusty's on our team and he was the alternate, but most people don't like to get the call 24 hours away from an expedition race. But, so Bend Racing, my team, my wife is at the front right now. They're currently leading, which is honestly a position that they are not that comfortable with. At least I'm not that comfortable with as a racer. So it's been really exciting to watch that they've kind of stepped into that more in the last year, as has Estonia. So one of the things I'm really fascinated about is right now the two lead teams have together, if you collectively look at their wins in World Series races, it's maybe a quarter of Vitarade, which is the third place team. Vitarade is 1 and 1 and 1, and they get tired of winning, or we get tired of them winning. Sometimes they just have been a powerhouse. And so at the front end, it's a tight race for those top two teams. And Vitarade you can tell they're on the hunt. Those guys are super experienced. Ertzi's a huge organizer as well. He's been in the game for years and years and years. They've been ranked number one in the world, and they are playing catch up. And really, Bend Racing and Estonia it's their race to lose. They've got a couple hours on Viderade, right?
In terms of time estimates, I would say, yeah, a couple hours sounds like it right now. If I'm looking at the tracker, Bend Racing and Estonian are sitting together in the TA. They're coming off a paddle, going on a bike, and Viderade is up the river bearing down on them. Also worth pointing out that Viderade has Mary Chandler on their team. Mary is perhaps one of the best American adventure racers right now, so they are not going away anytime soon. Brent, I know you've been following along. What's your take so far?
Yeah, I mean, I think similar. I think for folks that are not super familiar with international racing, I think it's worth highlighting how deep the top of the field is at this race. I mean, we've mentioned Viderade. We briefly mentioned Estonia, right? I mean, Estonia is a top, 3 to 5 team in the world, depending on who you want to talk to. But you've also got, Brazil Multisport. You have 2 French teams who have some really outstanding athletes between them. From what I can tell, and Jason, you probably can confirm this, they're kind of racing in these mishmashes of athletes, not necessarily people that have always raced together, but people that have always raced on good teams. And then one team that I actually have been kind of curious watching them, Racing Denmark. We had the opportunity to see them at Itera last year in Scotland, and they won that race, and they won that race comfortably. I mean, they were just really fast, and they had also won a couple big races in Europe against top European competition. It doesn't seem like this race is going super well for them from at least a speed perspective. Bend is up there leading this race against, 6 elite teams from around the world. I think, as Jason said, these are, Viderade always wins, right? And when they don't, it's because Seagate or Avaya are there. So I'm kind of curious to hear Jason's insight. Jason, absolutely no offense to your team. Like, we all know that Bend is arguably the best team in North America and has been for a while. When you go to a world championship, you tend to be like the top team or the second American team, often behind these teams. So what do you think is going on for your guys as they're, leading the charge for basically 48 hours here, being hunted by these elite teams?
Right. So to be honest, we've been working at this for 2 years, kind of in secret, like not really in secret, but we've really been listening to what Nathan talks about and building a team culture, building a team protocol. So we have 11 athletes that are all doing the same training, that have the same understanding of caffeine, sleep strategy, pushing. And so we've really taken a year and a half to convince and to train together virtually and have these meetings so that we can create essentially the culture that we know is necessary for us to go from being that, 90% team to mixing it up in the top 1%. And this is, we've had some really good successes. Last year, we had a great race at your guys' race last year. And it's been really cool seeing that just get more and more solidified. And, it was great having Dusty jump in at the end. And, I'm not going to give all the secrets, but it's like sleep strategies, how hard we push ourselves, how we take care of ourselves, foot care, caffeine, like just having a plan. And the easy way to explain it, and I'm hoping that more like intermediate racers start to look at it this way, is the big part of the team culture that we're looking at is how can we race preventatively and proactively instead of reactively? How can we still be on day 3 and not reacting to falling apart or blisters or sleepiness? How can we stem that stuff off until day 5, right? Until we have to push. And you just see, like you mentioned, Avaya, that's what they do. Like, they don't let the race affect them. They race in control. It's almost like instead of racing other teams, that they're trying to set the fastest known time possible. I kind of feel like Avaya goes to a race and they're like, this race said this race can't be done in this time. And they're like, our goal is just to beat that time. Right. And in doing so, they win race after race after race after race. And so it's been looking at 2 decades of racing as a team and being like, how do we get to that last bit? And sitting back, it makes me nervous because I'm waiting for them to lose their protocol. Like, we have everything written out and planned and everyone's talked about it, but they're not used to being in the front for 48 hours. Right.
Yeah.
Right. We were freaking out. I'll be honest. When we were racing Endless Mountains, we're like, where's Bones? Where are these teams? Right. So it's really cool to see that. But I don't, I'm not going to make any predictions. Don't ask me to make any predictions, Brian. I'm not doing it.
Promise. I want no predictions. This will be recorded forever on the internet. Emily, what do you think so far about the front of the race?
Actually, I find it really interesting, Jason, that you're kind of talking about the Bend Racing team culture being modeled after, the American version of what Avaya has accomplished in New Zealand, based in New Zealand and then international. I was actually really reminded about that during the weather hold last night, because, basically that was a dark zone, right? Teams had to stop. They couldn't proceed. And I feel like that is one of the kind of calling cards of Avaya or any championship teams, is they really manage that dark zone. And I feel like Bend hit it perfectly. You kind of I say you, but your team rolled into TA, pretty much right at that 11 o'clock PM mark, got a good sleep, and we're ready to go at 3, based on what I wasn't awake watching the tracker at that time. So just seeing those breadcrumbs this morning, clicking on 13's little dot and seeing all the blue lines where the team went, it was like, gosh, they really maximized that dark zone and got great sleep without anyone gaining an advantage on them. So, other teams, they may have had just as good of a rest. I know some teams were sleeping in bathrooms, some teams were just sleeping out in the bush. And, that is going to be really interesting to hear everybody's story about where they were during the gnarly weather.
Well, and to that point, and moving towards the back of the race and back of the full course teams, there's definitely a conversation to be had after the race with Naira Montbell and then Team Disability. They were two teams that were racing head to head the entire time. The dark zone was approaching, right? And thank you to the racers for actually getting my team name into the race itself. The dark zone was approaching, and clearly there was a spot there where Disability knew they were up against a 1 o'clock cutoff, and Naira made a run for it, and they got out of that TA, which is going to give Naira a significant advantage points wise. I just looked at the tracker, and Naira is not doing all those pro points on that track. They've clearly are cutting their losses a bit, and they're getting going, which they have to, right? They have to race smart, and that's going to be their philosophy. But I'm really curious as to Disability and Naira, how that crux point in the race for those teams that want to go full course, that want to have those micro challenges inside the race. That's going to be really interesting. I know that Brent had some thoughts on that before.
I would just, for less experienced dot watching folks who might be listening to this, just kind of, remind everybody that the leaderboard as we see it may not be actually accurate. Right. There's a lot of information in these races that sometimes doesn't leak out until after the race. So I have questions about some of that. I have questions about teams that were like Disability and several others who were told to ride to TA 8 once they got up and left TA 4. Are they ranked behind teams that were allowed to stay on the full course, or are they going to continue to rank things by total checkpoints? And I don't know if anyone else here knows that, but I don't have an answer to that question right now.
Yeah, I can answer that question because I've obviously been very obsessively dot watching and have a lot of friends at all the levels in the field. But anybody that gets all the mandatory points will be ranked ahead of anybody that's been short coursed at all. So the first ranking is going to be number of mandatory points. And, looking at the videos and talking to Thomas and Disability, it was an interesting choice for somebody that wanted to have a high ranking or get as high ranking, because they got to that TA at 6 o'clock. And they, the race rules said you had to leave by 1 a.m. So they were there 7 hours ahead of that. And then the new storm warning said you had to stop at 11, right? 11 p.m. So basically that they needed to leave on the rest of the full course before 11 p.m. And then they had to find shelter. But I think they rented a cabin based on there's a video of this really nice cabin. And I don't know if somebody was hurting on that team or if they just were scared of the storm or worried, or maybe they were just too comfortable, which happens sometimes. Let's face it, when you're 3 days into a event race, if you've got a cabin with a fireplace and a nice bed, it's a damn
shower.
Hard thing to shower. Yeah. So they basically at that point, knowingly or unknowingly, gave up their top 10 goal because they just couldn't, they now are so far behind in the point ranking. So now they're really just racing the other short course teams, and everybody that took that route is ranked below any team that gets all the mandatory points now.
I think I want to just want to wait. I mean, we've all four of us have done races, right, where information that seems like it's clear in the moment, right, in the middle of night 2 when there's tornado warnings going on, gets communicated to teams, and it's not always actually as clear as we think. And I'm not criticizing the volunteers or the race directors at all. You can write things out as explicitly as possible, and it's not always crystal clear. I have to wonder if this ability fully understood.
Yeah, me too.
That situation. Because I mean, it is an odd decision knowing, those guys are good mid-pack racers who, have been working hard to get better. And I think I don't know them super well personally, but I having been in the sport for almost 20 years, they're a team that I'm sure is trying to elevate to the level where they can take a shot at full course. Whether that was their goal for this race or not, I don't know. But an odd decision making me wonder if maybe they did not appreciate what the changes were implying. I mean, someone pointed out on Facebook, right? You have to leave by 1 a.m., but no one's allowed to leave until 3 a.m. And yeah, they had 5 hours to leave before the 11 p.m. cutoff. But there's a lot of conflicting information there, I feel like.
Well, that's one thing about adventure racing is the level of story. The most of the race takes place, most of the conversation is after the race ends, right? And we do this and we talk about it and who went where. I think what's interesting about this is that now from a race director perspective, if you look at the map, the race is completely up the road and there are 5 teams that are still TA7. And those 5 teams have to be cared for and fed and met. And if you look at the tracker, they're really far behind the rest of the race because so many other racers took that short course option. So I have to wonder what it must be like from a race director perspective, just to realize that there are, 20 adults that are behind you that you have to make sure that there's someone at a TA to meet them and punch their card and check their food and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I'm looking at the tracking map right now, and there's some experienced teams like Naira Montbell, right? Brian's fave.
Yep.
R&R, which is Rachel Furman and her teammate, his name also starts with an R, and I just don't know it. So they're totally, they've been in it. Old Shoes, they've been racing. Nebraska Unplugged, they've and no complaints. So it's like those are all seasoned racers.
And they're fine. They can be left alone. We're good.
Right. Yeah, they don't need any bells and whistles at a TA, but they do certainly need to get all of their boxes at the time they, were expecting them. And it does. This is the part of the race that does get stretched really thin.
But I mean, one thing to remember is that those guys are still well within what the race directors thought that TA would be open to. It's really just leapfrogged everybody that was at the other TA, just had a very easy bike ride to just jump way ahead. And so, I'm sure that TA, but it all is very interesting because we look at those lonely teams that, there's a whole big bike ride before they even see another person other than the ones that are around them. So,
I think also, I'm thinking back to RI Terra race and we found ourselves on the back of the full course estimates. Mm-hmm. And that's a tough place to be sometimes. And especially in a race like this, where you're not just the back of the full course, but you're also the back of the field. It's a really weird dynamic sometimes to kind of know that, all right, I'm actually ranked quite high, but I'm quite far behind everybody. I feel lonely. And I'm not sure I'm going to make cutoffs, and I'm chasing cutoffs the whole race. And I'm not saying I haven't looked at it that closely. Maybe those 5 teams are still well within cutoffs. I'm not sure. But I think we all know how that can go. That's a tough position to be in for those 5, I think.
Well, I think we've stepped into a bit of a vortex of perception here, right? It feels like they're at the back of the race, but in reality, they're exactly where they're supposed to be based on time cutoffs. The problem is that there's X amount of teams that are up ahead of them that we're supposed to, if not for the tornado warning, would be with them the entire time, right? So the from a race perspective, the race director has to begin to prepare for the idea that most likely the race will be ending a lot sooner than they expected for a lot of races. Right. I mean, I know that you have a pretty strong understanding of the time cutoffs, and it sounds like the front teams are ahead. Am I correct? They're way ahead of the time cutoffs. Oh, I said way ahead. How ahead are they?
Those front teams jumped about 4 hours ahead in the. So we'll call maybe day one the triathlon, right? They had a short trek, kind of a short bike, kind of a short paddle. That was all pretty fast, and then the long trek, the nearly 50-mile trek, that was leg 4-ish. That teams just kind of blazed through that, even though, my understanding is that the terrain and the navigation was actually quite challenging. So, just kudos to those teams and their fitness level. And really that's when, the lead teams, at least after the big trek, kind of started putting time on the race director's fastest estimates. So it's been, I don't know. I love to see teams overachieving like that. It's pretty fun.
There were dot watchers I was talking to. They were getting the heebie-jeebies during that big trek, thinking that the maps and the trails were disconnected from one another, and there was concerns that because for those at home who are listening, you had to stay on the trail for the purpose of the big trek. You were not allowed to cut across the trail, and so as we were watching at home, and you try to take the race maps and you try to go to CalTopo, Google Earth, and you try to look at the different layers, it felt like there were going to be lacking trails. And we were really concerned that a team was going to walk into a dead end and the trail was going to end. And because then what do you do when that happens? Luckily enough that concern was misplaced, and those teams all sort of made it. Go ahead, Brent.
I saw a video with Team Warrior, who's one of the, there's 5 or 6. We talked about the elite teams. Warriors kind of leading the charge of the, I'd say probably another 5 half dozen teams or so that are, really high quality North American teams. There's a bunch of Canadian and American teams there, and several of them could be, in the top 5 by the end of it. They were coming off the trek, and Mark Latanzi and Jesse Spangler, who I think are doing the navigation, talked about how they actually had that exact problem. They found themselves on all kinds of trails where they had to go backwards. And so it's interesting because I think on the tracking map, outside of 1 or 2 spots, it kind of looked like it was clean navigation for just about everybody, but it sounds like it was actually not as clean as it looks because of that kind of dynamic and that ruling.
Yeah, I saw a video with the Ben crew and another crew too that talked about how difficult that navigation was once you hit the pro points. Like it was all straightforward and running roads and trails, and then all of a sudden you got to the optional part of that big trek, and they weren't really prepared. They were like, "Whoa, the checkpoints are harder to find. They're smaller features, and there's a lot of extra trails." And as with any old map, it's not necessarily GPS. Sometimes the trails are approximations that would get your average through hiker from point A to point B. But when you're trying to find a little orange flag in the woods, it's easy to get obsessed with, junctions and micronav. And that's caused some headaches until you adapt. And so I think that was a pretty big wake up call to some of the top teams who are running and, going super fast. And then all of a sudden had to think and really assess what was real and what was just in their head.
Recognizing that the 4 of us have not raced in this area, we've raced as part of the Ozark. It sounds like the people are having a really hard time with navigation for the lack of big features, and the fact that it's this really kind of there's nothing large to aim towards. There's a lot of, the compass headings are difficult. The trails are somewhat fading. From your armchair perspective, how would you approach the navigation for this part of the race? Do you think it would be like, how would you go at it? Emily, what would you do?
I do need to kind of share. So Brian and I were talking before we hit record, and I am in northern Minnesota right now, but I have done quite a bit of racing in Missouri, and I've been to the Northwest Arkansas area, which is pretty similar. And I actually think that, you do have to take, there are big features. Maybe they're not mountains, and maybe they're not, using your altimeter to mark off every 1,000 feet, but the reentrants are pretty prominent. And the creek beds are very prominent. And I think that it's definitely challenging, but it's not the most complex navigation that we've seen in an expedition race.
Right. I would say looking, I read the post that said, they're going to especially the trek that's in the middle of the boat that all the top teams are either done with or doing. There was some speculation that it was going to split the field apart and it was going to be really challenging navigation. And for the top 6 teams, at least, it's been not trivial, but very, very straightforward. And I think they mostly did it in the daylight. There's a lot of roads. There's a lot of attack points. And for those of you that don't know what attack points are, it's just like it's a fake checkpoint that you kind of put in your head or put on the map to go to before you go find the real checkpoint. So you have these known locations that are closer to the actual checkpoints. But there's a ton of those. And like I watched Bend Racing and Estonia and Beta, they all did slightly different routes, but they just basically walked to each checkpoint without moving around. And they did it during daylight. I imagine teams that are tired and at night. And you've got to remember too, that's top 6 teams, the top 10 teams in the field right now have some of the best navigators and most experienced expedition navigators in the sport, with Warrior, with Tower, with those 2 Canadian teams. I mean, these guys are super pros. So I think that, the navigation for this race, other than that first stage, hasn't been all that crazy for some of these top teams. But I think, we'll see if it comes into play with sleep deprivation.
You raised a good question there about Team Warrior. Right now, they're at that part of that trek. They're sitting within the top 10. I'm curious what their decision is going to be about going for those pro points, right? Because to your point, right, they're at the towards the back end of the pointy part of the race, right? And will they be getting out of the boat? Will they be going off and getting those pro points? I think absolutely. I do not see Mark Latanzi and Jesse Spangler not doing that, but it's going to get harder to do that further down the race when you get more and more tired.
Yeah, just to clarify though, Warrior is actually currently at the boat drop to go out on that trek. I don't see them dropping it. I think it's it's No Complaints. It's Naira, who also are super experienced.
TA7 party teams.
Yeah, exactly. I like that. The TA7 party. When the party bus gets there, how many of those teams decide to go out? On a time kind of projection, there are a few different numbers I've seen that are not always 100% aligned, but they're pretty close. I went back through their course guide this evening, and basically, I believe if my math is correct, where Bend and Estonia currently are sitting at TA, they have completed what was projected to be 67 and a half hours of racing, roughly, in 61 and a half. So they're like 6-ish hours ahead, but that also includes sleep and TAs. So normally time projections don't take into account those 2 factors. So they may be even further ahead than really anticipated.
Well, also the hold.
Yeah. And the hold. Right. Exactly. They have 30 hours of course left according to the projections. So that'll get them in right around 90 hours. And you've got like a day plus left of racing to go, right? So I think a team like Warrior is still very safely within the bounds of finishing a full course.
Right.
The party bus at the back, I'm not positive.
So here's an interesting little twist on the mid pack. If you take a look at the tracker now, Disability Racing has left the water and is now doing those pro points on that trek. And it's a death match in my head between Naira Montbell and Disability, right? That's where because they were so close to each other. Naira Montbell came off the earlier section where TA7 is. They didn't get all those pro points down there. So in reality, Disability may benefit from their big sleep and their short course if they get these pro points on this section of the race, and they may begin to chip away at
a CP rich environment now where Disability is.
Right. Because I believe I am reading Naira Montbell's decision correctly. If I look back there, they came off that section early and did not get all those pro points.
No, they did the whole thing. Naira did. Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. Naira did the whole track. So they're full. They've got everything up to where they are. Yeah.
Oh, they stand corrected then.
Yep. Yeah, I think
in a good way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Naira did No Complaints as well. I remember watching them closely. I know they did. I'll check the others out of curiosity. Keep going.
So Emily, I have a question for you.
Bring it on.
So since you obviously know this race, what are the cutoffs ahead of these teams? Like, do you have your list? So what are the cutoffs that No Complaints or Naira is facing? If any, that might impact their.
There, to my knowledge, the only cutoff is the trek in the middle of the Kings River paddle. So the trek that the lead teams are finished or just have finished, that would be a mandatory skip if they are on the short course. And I think the rest of it is I think the rest of it just has the finish line cut off.
Okay, cool. That's great. I like that type of racing. It really, it's one of the things that I don't know how you guys feel having been in the sport for a long time, but I'm seeing this evolution of the sport from where it came from with these big point-to-point courses that the top teams would finish in 5 days and would be open for 11 days. And we can all think back, and there's, it's kind of like when the person says, I used to walk 20 miles to school each way. We just can't do that enough.
Right.
Like, it takes a special place. It takes a special race director. It takes a ton of time, and what's our own abilities better, because now the course isn't open. It used to be like the standard, what's the winning time? And then open the course twice as long or more than twice as long. And that's not happening anymore. Right. So we're coming into these new formats that a lot of people are experimenting with these pro points, with optional things, with short courses, which to me allows these race directors to kind of really do what's best for the area in some ways in a better, cooler way. And then also forces teams to really understand that if they're moving too slow, they better make choices, or the course is going to, it's like,
right,
where they're not going to finish. Right. And so I think that's taking some time for some of these kind of intermediate and even back of the pack teams to come to terms with and to figure out, like Orange Lederhosen. Those are great guys. I raced against them in Belize, or at least the guy with the beard. And, they were still on the first trek, right? When, talking about a spread and not sure what happened to them, they've got to have great stories, but, and they still get the race, right? So it's just a kind of cool thing. And yet race directors don't have to somehow carve out 12 days to maintain this. And then the buzz to me is really nice as a racer, because there's something sad as a racer if you're at the back of the pack when basically everybody's packed up and gone home because the race was over 6 days ago, and then your dot is just moving for 5 more days. So you kind of finish within 36 hours, which is pretty cool.
The other part of it too is, and just was explained to me by someone who races in Africa and other parts of the world, we don't have that expansive point-to-point geography here in some parts of America. Like, you need to do something like that.
We don't have the permitting for it.
The permitting too, exactly. I mean, the permits alone, right? And so we've had to come up with the idea of the pro points. And you mentioned before, I've heard you mention in your podcast that was really something that Ben sort of helped bring about. And the point where that has to be that way, right? That we just have to have these unique models. You get out of the boat, and I know last year Endless Mountains had that twice on that canoe, right? All right, yeah. Brent, they would come out of the canoe twice, and they had to do that and get back in, because you need terrain, and you need, with the permitting and with the space you have, that's how it goes. Brent, I see you feverishly looking at your monitor there. I think there's some thought in your head. What are you seeing going on right now at the racing? I can see you tapping buttons.
No, I was mostly just confirming what's going on with those 5 teams at the back, and I did confirm that 4 of the 5 are full course, completed the whole trek. The only team that did not was Old Shoes. They got off that trek early. So yeah, I was just confirming that.
Gotcha. Well, good for them. Go ahead, Emily.
Go ahead. Well, I just want to say, Jason, you mentioned Orange Lederhosen, and that was one of my bullet point teams to shout out during the recording. So they're just a staple of Kansas, Missouri races. Yeah. Super happy they made the trek to Arkansas. Really great people, experienced racers. Definitely not at the front of the pack, but really a treat to have them at the race. So just happy they're there.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think the feedback's going to be on the course itself in terms of the racing down there? Will people have enjoyed the course? I mean, we're hearing the word beautiful a whole lot. They say the rivers are gorgeous, the bluffs they're seeing, the gorges, all of that. Do you think we're going to see is Ozark going to begin to get a place on the regular calendar?
Who wants to take that? I mean, I think.
I'll Of course, Jason freezes when we ask the controversial
race,
question. Jason freezes, and he's still answering it. You froze there for a second, Jason. Give another shout out.
Okay. I mean, I think they're doing a great job. I think a big thing that's important to the World Series is the media coverage, the safety, the racer experience, and I think they knocked that out of the park. I mean, just with any race director, you learn something the first couple times you do it, and the only feedback that I'd have just watching it, and I'm not a racer, so I don't know how the racers are experiencing this, is very different than Brent's race. When we had these loops, they're doing a lot of trekking loops, but a lot of the trekking loops have a kind of a mandatory long out and back start where they're retracing their steps over a lot of stuff 2 or 3 times. They came in on the bike, then they trek out that way, and then they trek back that way. So if there's a way to kind of eliminate that or change the TAs so that the terrain feels fresh the whole time, because I remember Endless Mountains, we'd stop the boat and we'd do this huge loop, but there wasn't, it all felt very unique. It was more like a big circle instead of a lollipop. But that's the only thing I see looking and imagining myself racing is like, it's really annoying to bike in one way and then run 5 miles of what you just biked to get to a track. So, but that's also just logistically sometimes hard.
I do think the race organizers have such great natural resources to work with. Like obviously the Ozark Natural Forest, pretty great terrain. I'm very jealous of all of the paddling on the Buffalo River. The first national scenic river. It is just beautiful. The water is such a nice color this time of year. Sounds like the rapids have been interesting and, a way to keep awake a little bit. And maybe not as challenging as Oregon, but definitely maybe in the fun zone. And I think I'm just kind of zooming out on the tracking map and just looking at what else there is. And, the Buffalo River goes on for ages. We've only touched maybe a third of the Ozark National Forest land area. Obviously there's all the single track that the racers will experience as they finish in Bentonville. That's, they're only on a small portion of that. So I feel like there's a lot of additional playground to explore.
They also have a rappelling section and a caving section ahead of them too.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah.
So and the way that's designed is that there's a mandatory point not far from the rappel and the cave. So they're making teams at least get to that section to make the decision to go in and do those or not. So that's a very obvious thing you're seeing now as the race continues. We are not in the business of guessing who does what and how well it works out. But what has experience shown us about what will the factors be that we're going to see? What are the equations at the end of the race? What's going to make or break the rest of the race for the teams at the front?
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. You can go.
I think that the interesting dynamic to me is Estonia. We kind of all watched Estonia lead at the World Championships and then falter, unfortunately, at the very end. I feel like now the tables are a little bit turned, right? They're watching Ben make all the right moves. And maybe that's in their minds of, gosh, maybe there's an opportunity for us at the very end of the course to sneak through if there's a mistake. So I think that dynamic is really interesting at the front is, who can be comfortable racing with the lead, which is a very stressful place to be. And
Ben and Estonia have been there for a long time. I think it's going to be really fun. Vitarade is known for not sleeping. I mean, for God's sake, they did Expedition Oregon and somehow managed to finish it on like half the sleep of the second place team that finished 20 minutes behind them. It was just insane to watch them walking around. And so they have the capability to somehow, it's their superhuman strength. So I'm really expecting them to make a crazy surge and start to take all sorts of chances to catch up with the top two.
Yeah, Brent, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think Jason kind of alluded to this, and I'm both super excited for Ben as an American, right, and as somebody that's friendly and friends with everyone on that team. Mm-hmm. And it feels like they've run a perfect race. I'm sure they haven't. Like, it's very hard to do that, but from the outside, it kind of looks like they're doing it. And you just gotta hope that they hold on. To your question of what's going to factor in, they have roughly a day of racing left, give or take, depending on how things shake out. They're obviously tired. I think a lot of it's going to come down to race management, right? And can Ben keep managing their team and all those other factors, sleep and nutrition? And, I don't know what the temperatures are going to look like tomorrow, but I know there's been some pretty brutal heat early on in this race that's affected a lot of top teams. And can they kind of keep running that race, or does Estonia get a chance to take advantage of a mistake? Vitorade's kind of, you'd like to think they've made their mistakes. They've made some pretty tough ones so far that kind of felt like unforced errors. And they worked really hard, I think, to recover from those. And it feels like they've either, it's hard to tell if they kind of burned a little bit too much catching back up to the front, or they're just kind of going steady right now and maybe setting themselves up for like a strong last 24 hours. I think the race in general, back to the earlier kind of conversation, it's a relatively straightforward race. And obviously it's been a little more tricky than it looks, especially the big trek. But overall, it's not a race that has a ton of like really technical navigation. So the gap is big enough now between Vitorade and the other elite teams that it's hard to imagine them getting back in. But 24 hours, stranger things have happened. So yeah,
a lot of TAs left too.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
A lot of road left. As I just checked the tracker right now, Ben Racing is out of transition. They're on the bike, and Estonia is still in transition, if I'm reading the tracker here correctly. And so clearly, and then Vitorade is right behind them. So you could see a bit of a change in that 2-3 spot. You could see a change, and the Magic is going to see if Ben Racing holds on for the rest of it. And on top of that too, I'm curious to see how we do with our mid pack and our back of the pack teams.
I have my other mid pack shout out.
Okay, let it loose.
Is I want to do a shout out to Team Natural State. They had a really funny video of eating a hot meal in like a store. I don't know what kind of store they were at, maybe like a general store at a campground or something. This is from the Expedition Ozark media crew. Mm-hmm. And so they were at this cute little table eating, a nice meal, and the media is asking them, how's it going? Have you interacted with the locals? And maybe but Team Natural State is Arkansas. Right. So they are the locals. And they said that back like, well, we are the locals. Right.
And the person with the camera was kind of like, well, you're not live here. And they're like, okay, buddy, whatever.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
Nice try.
Yeah. But then they also had a very professional move of they were eating a hot meal, and then they were ordering a second meal of chicken tenders to bring with them for later in the race. So very professional, kudos. Those chicken tenders will last like 2 to 3 days probably. So order up. And
that's a great, and I appreciate Emily bringing that up. Everyone who's listening to this podcast, you're missing out if you don't go over to the Expedition Ozark page. All the media is sitting there. There's a video of Team Pentacon, BC Wild, Natalie Long's team taking refuge in a church overnight during the storm. There's a video of a gentleman, and I'm going to say like fast food for freight. It's not the right word. It's what food's in the name of and he's having that moment in the TA where he's having a bit of an emotional moment, and he's a little teary in front of the camera. The videos are great. Jeff O'Connor is doing a fantastic job. Heidi Muller and her team at the ARWS has put together a great sense of media, almost too much media. Like we're adding ourselves to the fire hose that is coming across here. And I know that Jason's still talking about it, and there's more live streams coming the next few nights. Yeah, Jason, you're going to say something.
Yeah, well, I have a question because I don't want to do, for personal reasons, I don't really want to do predictions to the top, right? But I'm also super fascinated with there's a little bit of national pride within racing, right? And there's 2 Canadian teams that are racing pretty much neck and neck, or they're both very, very skilled. So what do you guys think? Which Canadian team is going to take it, and who's going to be basically the second place US team? I mean, is it going to be Warrior? Is Tower going to make a push? Like, what do you guys think for that kind of Canadian top spot and US second spot?
You also really, I think you also really want to know if we think Ben's going to hold on.
No, I really don't. I'm plugging my ears. I don't. I have, I like when I get off this, I'm gonna go get on the treadmill with my kidney stone because I'm making the whole team that's not racing. They're coming over to the pain cave. They're doing extra work. We're sending them out there. I don't want to go. Right. But just what do you guys think about Tower and Warrior? I've been watching that really closely. And the Canadians.
I'm taking another quick peek right now. So, Warrior had a decent little gap.
Well, I can tell you what happened. So this is cool. So Warrior was able to get on the water. So they on the longer river, they basically said you got to get on by 8. Maybe they did for all the rivers. So even though the cutoff for the weather was 11, if you were going to get on a paddle stage, you had to get on by 8. Warrior rolled into TA at 7:30. There's a video of them doing a super fast TA and carrying uninflated or semi-inflated pack rafts into the river and sitting in them because it counted to be on the river. And then they probably stopped right down and blew them up and finished the paddle in darkness before 11. However, Tower got there 8:06, right? And we're told you cannot go. And so what they did to make it fair is they then held Warrior because they basically, forced Tower to have an extra, 2 hours and 54 minutes of rest. And so they forced Warrior to have an extra 2 hours and 54 minutes of rest. Right. So they just had the rest in different places, but it neutralized that time. And so now they're much closer.
Well, they're literally, they're neck and neck on the river right now.
Yeah. So it looks to me like Warrior is sleeping. If you look at their dots, they have a dot tracking just upriver from where they currently are plotted about an hour ago.
Yep.
And they've been doing something there at the boat drop since, unless they're not pinging, but it looks like they are. There's several dots more or less where they are currently parked. And Tower is now within half a kilometer probably of getting there. So I think that's interesting, like we're essentially, unless there's some time credits or things like that, they're virtually tied.
Yeah.
So I don't know the Tower guys well.
They look super fresh. Jameson looked super fresh before when he was in one of the TAs. When he was talking, he really, same with Mark too. Mark sounded the same way, but definitely the attitude perspective feels strong on both teams.
Yeah. Jesse Spangler is an incredible athlete.
Yeah.
And, James Gallipo also is he's a super strong racer. They are one of the most experienced teams at the race. So it's hard to bet against that. It also seems like Tower might have got like a better night's sleep overall last night is my guess. I'm not looking too closely, but because they got held at 8:06 instead of racing till 11, I'm assuming they slept for 6-7 hours, maybe even more. So that's tough.
What's your prediction? I just want to be able to say,
I'm going with Warrior.
Whether you're right or wrong at the end.
I think I'll err toward Warrior based off of experience and savviness. Go with that.
Yeah, I think because I know Warrior better, I have to go with them. I don't know Tower Racing that well, but definitely I know two of the racers on Warrior very, very well. So I think the second place American team is going to be Warrior, and third place is going to be Tower Racing.
Right.
But I would like to also qualify it publicly so Tower doesn't absolutely hate me, though everything I've seen is they're the nicest people in the world. I can't imagine they would ever do that. They're a super impressive team. They're, yes, they're less experienced, but, I think they've made a huge splash on the West Coast and, are really getting their feet wet in bigger races, mostly still out West Coast, if not entirely until this one. They were super impressive at Nationals, had a really great performance at Nationals. And wouldn't surprise me at all if they took that challenge.
Exactly.
And they even made up some more spots, honestly.
I will mirror what Brent is saying right there. Now about our friends to the north. What's the pick on the as you were saying before, Jason? What's our friends on our Canadian racers? How's that going to work out? What do you think, Emily?
Well, so it's basically I'm just a couple hours drive from Canada. We still have about a meter of snow on the ground if we're, using metric. So right now, the two Canadian teams, we've got team number 5, the Visit Pentacon BC Wild. Mm-hmm. That's Natalie Long's team, right? And then they're on the lead, paddling towards the I don't know, the medium trek, the wilderness area trek. And then attack from above is behind them on the river a ways, couple hours.
Yeah.
I do really admire Natalie Long and her just whole vibe of, she trains multi-sport year round. She's a race director. She really just lives and breathes adventure and then throws down when it's an adventure race. So I just have a lot of confidence in her, and I think she's a good team leader. So maybe it's a rooting for the Visit Pentacon, but definitely I'll go ahead and predict that they stay in the lead.
I also don't want any Canadians to ever lose in anything ever, because they're the nicest people in the world. I want all the Canadians to win. I want it to be a tie.
Yeah.
What do you think, Brent?
I'm gonna go with the same with Pentacon. It seemed to me like they kind of had a slow start to this race. I mean, they're a team that is capable of racing up in that top 5. Attack from above is a really good team. I don't know that they would mix it up with those elite world teams, but I think Pentacon's got the ability to do that. I mean, yeah, Natalie, you spoke to Natalie. Chad Spence has been on ARWS winning teams before. I mean, he's won at least 1 or 2 ARWS events. And I got to think they're going to hold that. I'm also, I mean, it's not the Canadian team, but I did just notice I think they're side by side with Racing Denmark. I'm still watching Racing Denmark to see if maybe they're a Nordic team. Maybe the heat has really been tough on them. And, maybe things are cooling off. I wonder if there's any chance we see them take a shot at catching up to the next group of teams.
I had Racing Denmark in my top 5 before the race started. After seeing them last year at Iterra, I thought for certain they'd be out there. I think they're having a tough race. Something's going on there with them.
Yeah. And I mean, I have to fix one thing, because you guys are all obviously East Coasters. So, and I have heard this over and over again. There's a city in America that everybody loves. It's called Bend. We have amazing mountain biking and awesome adventure racing. There's a city in Canada called Penticton,
right,
which everybody loves.
The Ironman.
So I just want everybody to know, talking about Visit Penticton, and also the city that's supporting Natalie. Like, Penticton is the place you want to go in Canada. So for all you East Coasters, if you hear this, they're talking about the town of Penticton. More just like if somebody was saying Bend is banned, I'd be like, they're never going to come visit here. So go to Penticton and you can race there for Expedition Canada, because that's where that's going to be. But yeah, I agree with you. Chad Spence is hard to bet against. He won Expedition Oregon actually in the second year with some of the Quest racers. He's a fantastic navigator, and I know Natalie and I know how competitive she is. So she was at Expedition Oregon last year. I think they ended up in 4th. They got beat by another Canadian team just out of 3rd. And yeah, she likes to push it. So I'm sure she is trying to whip the rest of her team into beating the other Canadians. If anything, just for that little bit of national pride, which is really, really fun to race for.
Emily, closing thought. It was your first Dark Zone. Leave us with something.
Gosh, I have enjoyed my time. Love talking into the details and breadcrumbs of adventure racing watching with people who enjoy it just as much as I do. I'm excited to see the finish of this race. I think that kind of what I opened with, I think the race directors, even though it's their rookie year, they're doing a great job. I love seeing all the different little stories of all the teams. We're not just focused on, the front of the pack with the media. They're really catching everybody. I think the teams are really, I've ridden some of those back 40 in Bentonville Slaughter Pen trails. Like, they're fun. Especially Slaughter Pen has like a dedicated downhill flow course that, if you get to ride it, obviously going downhill, it's a lot of like hoot and holler time. So close to the finish line, it'll be really enjoyable. And I hope that teams keep looking forward to, crossing that finish line as a team and safely and sharing their stories.
Yeah.
Jason, what do you think?
I just I just want to say a huge shout out to USARA and to ARWS and just adventure racing in general for growing smartly the last couple of years. As 2 decades of adventure racing in my old bones, it's pretty amazing to feel the growth and feel the response to the people that are leading this, and the race directors. So that's just really, really exciting. And I've been to the Ozarks. I used to climb there, and it is stunning. And I'm very jealous that I'm sitting at home. I mean, there's a piece of me that's very excited now because I know how hard those racers are working right now. But it's a stunning place to have a race. It's a welcome addition to the calendar, and all the media, you guys included, just this sort of analysis, this sort of energy in the sport is a really beautiful thing. And so, kudos to all the racers for being out there and giving us all something to sit here and talk about and watch and be fascinated by. And hopefully everybody listening to this will keep racing and start wherever they are and know that there's a world of awesome adventure possibilities to this sport.
I want to thank you for that, Jason. I want to close out by giving a compliment to Heidi Muller and her team at ARWS for working with so many racers and racers around the world, around the country. There's a whole swath of racing coming up. I know that Expedition Oregon's taking a year off. Can't wait to get that back. Endless Mountains is right around the corner. Shout out to Bentonville, Arkansas. It must be nice to work with a town that actually returns your phone calls, because they are clearly they've rolled out the red carpet for the racers, and that they've shown very, very well. And to Danny and Jason's credit, putting an adventure race on is difficult for anybody, and to put a 5-day race on as your first race is a jump into the deep end of the pool. So thanks to them. Thanks to our crack panel, Emily, Jason, and Brent, for being here. Those of you who are still listening, please head over to your streaming platform of choice and like and subscribe and click and spread the word. The Dark Zone will continue to be free at all times for all listeners. You keep racing and we'll keep talking. Be safe, everybody.